Hey guys, so today we got the first decent harvest from this property. Now before I've gotten some herbs, some cilantro and parsley, a little bit of lettuce, but today it was time for a pea harvest. And my mom's visiting, she's staying with us. And so her and I went out and we harvested the peas and we got a lot of them. And these are shelling peas. So her and Noah actually spent some quality grandson time together shelling those peas. And it was really sweet. I had to grab a video of that because it reminded me of snapping green beans with my grandmother back when I was probably Noah's age, maybe a little even younger than that. So that was really nice. But I wanted to give you guys a quick update on our temporary vegetable garden. And it's temporary because I needed a place to plant vegetables this fall. We just moved here, as you know, and I've been spending my time getting the new vegetable garden done, which I have to say I am on track to hit my goal. We should be ready to plant out March 1st. In fact, over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be putting in the raised beds on top of the terraces that we've already built. So this vegetable garden was just to tide me over until that one was done. And so it's just this fall and winter crops, and then we'll be moving over there for spring and summer. And another quick comment, we broke ground this week on our new chicken coop. So that's exciting. If you want to follow along on all these projects on our new little farm and gardens, go ahead and go over to our newest channel, Next Level Homestead. But back to the temporary vegetable garden. As you can see behind me, it looks nice and lush. And if you remember, these are the no-dig beds that I started back in the fall. And basically, this started out as just hard clay and decomposed granite soil. I didn't do any kind of amendment. I didn't do any tilling, digging, nothing. I followed strictly the no-dig method. I put down cardboard to block the weeds, and then I put about 5 or 6 inches of compost on top of that and planted the seedlings directly into it. I was skeptical. I really was. I've done no-dig gardening, but that was in raised beds. It doesn't quite work the same way. It doesn't count the same. But I gotta say, this is as good or better than I ever had crops growing in my raised bed at our last house. Not only is everything growing well, but the weeds, this has actually kept down the weeds, which I'm really shocked about because as you can see, let me flip the camera around. Everywhere else is weeds, but I've had very little weed issues in the actual garden spaces. So the compost and the layer of cardboard is doing its job. You can see I've got my Swiss chard, my rainbow Swiss chard. I've got my bull's blood beets. I've got some Napa cabbage and some regular cabbage, which are starting to actually head up nicely. So I might have some cabbage for St. Patrick's Day, but the majority of this cabbage is going to be going into sauerkraut. I'm a really big sauerkraut fanatic. I'm also going to try kimchi with the Napa cabbage. Over here in the spot next to it, I've got some purple sprouting broccoli, which always takes a long time to flower. No signs of flowering yet, so I'm just going to have to wait and be patient. And then along the back, I never did get the peas staked higher, which kills me, but we did get a good harvest off of them today, so I'm really happy about that. But it is time to start thinking about the new spring and summer vegetable garden, which is over on the other side of the house, and like I said, it's almost done. So I'm going to be doing some seeds starting indoors and outdoors this week. Today I'm going to start with some indoor ones, and I'm going to be growing those under my Viparspectra grow light. And I'm growing these indoors in particular because they're interesting and kind of special seeds that I want to make sure grow well and that nothing happens to them. And I don't exactly know how they grow or how they even grow as seedlings because I've never grown any of these before. So one is the ground cherry. If you guys have grown ground cherries before, let me know in the comments how you like them, what you think of them, and if there's anything special that I need to know to grow them well. Another one is Chinese pink celery, which I think looks really cool. So celery has to be started 8 to 12 weeks ahead of planting. So that's why I'm getting on this right now. I should have probably started it, well, 8 to 12 weeks for me before my last frost date is like December. But that's okay. It'll still work, I hope. This one, I don't even know if I'm growing it to eat as much as I am for just the sheer novelty of it. It is bitter melon, but it's white. Look at that white fruit. Snow white. I will try it. On the last video I talked about this, I said I was going to make smoothies or something. I'd sneak it into smoothies, and those of you who know said absolutely not. It tastes much better, less bitter when it's cooked. When it's raw, it's absolutely just really, well, probably non-edible for me because I don't like bitter things. And then the last of the four that I'm going to be sowing today is a superfood. Again, I've never grown it before, but it's the goji berry. Now this one is, you have to know your zone. Normally I say you don't have to know your zone when you're planting vegetables because, well, this is a fruit. So you do need to know your zone for a lot of fruits. But vegetables, you know, they're annuals. They go in and out in one season. They're done. This is a perennial. And this actually, these goji berries grow on 6 to 12 foot tall shrubs that are perennial. They do lose their leaves in the winter. I don't know if they will here, but in more cold winter climates, they will lose their leaves and then put them out again in spring. Now, I'm excited about these for a couple of reasons. These are actually hardy down to zone 5. So these can take a lot of cold. And they are drought tolerant or semi-drought tolerant. So that's going to be great here for me. In fact, I'm going to be using these. We have a lot of chain link fences around our property. And I'm looking for hedging and vines to kind of block out the neighbors and give us a little more privacy. These are going to be great for that. I'm going to plant a whole line of these along our front fence where I, just want to get some privacy. So I'm going to be planting in these cell trays, pretty typical way of doing it. But I want to walk you through step by step how I set these up, the type of medium that I use to grow in. Let's start there first. I make my own seed starting mix. You can get sterile, indoor potting mix. That's kind of the best thing to do. Or you can make your own. I use 3 parts peat to 1 part perlite. Now, I've discussed the use of peat in gardening and the positives and negatives. I've also discussed where you shouldn't use it, like Europe, where it's pretty much banned anyway. But if you're in North America, we can use peat. It is a sustainable product here. I'm not going to get into it on this video. I will link to another video where I talked about that down in the description. So if that's a concern and you want to yell at me and ask me what I'm doing, just go there. So once you mix your 3 parts peat moss and 1 part perlite, you want to pre-moisten it. So get the water in that bucket and really kind of squeeze it around and make sure, because peat is sometimes hard to get wet, and then it's hard to it takes a lot of water to really get a small amount of peat wet. So make sure that when you hold it together in your hand, it feels completely moist. Maybe a little bit of water drips out when you squeeze it. You don't want a ton of water where it's just going to be waterlogged, but a good light mixture that holds together when you let it go, and you might see just a few drips of water coming through your fingers when you squeeze it. Also, peat tends to get some little hard lumps in it. Make sure those are all crushed down and thoroughly moistened. You don't want a big chunk of one in one of your seed trays, which is going to dry out some of the roots of your seedlings. Okay, so I just looked at the goji berries, and they actually need to be soaked in water for 24 hours. So I'm going to have to plant these tomorrow. You always want to make sure, if it says that, that's something that is, if they have a very tough coating on the seeds, very tough outer shell, that 24-hour soak, typically started in warm water, is going to soften that shell so that when you do put the seeds in there, it's not going to take as long to germinate. So I'll put this aside for tomorrow. I'm going to plant the celery first. I'm kind of really interested to grow that just because it's so beautiful. And I eat celery, and I don't know, I eat a lot of celery with peanut butter. I'm not sure how pink celery is going to look with peanut butter. It's going to look weird, but I don't care. It's cool. Now the temperature of the celery, it takes 15 to 20 days for celery to germinate, and it needs to be between 60 and 80 degrees at all times. So I will be using my heat mat under the grow light to make sure that that temperature stays even. So these seeds are ridiculously small. So I'm just going to sprinkle a tiny, tiny little bit, and they will probably need to be thinned. But just see, that's probably like 15 seeds that's going into each cell. But you know, you can't help it sometimes. So I'm going to plant 3 rows or 3 rows of cells with this. Now to cover these seeds, I'm not going to cover them with more potting soil. I'm actually going to cover them with vermiculite. And I learned this trick from a couple of British gardeners who do very well with seed starting. So I have already pre-moistened my vermiculite. Vermiculite is a rock material, but it's very lightweight, very porous, holds onto nutrients, but drains well. It's also like an antimicrobial. It's much harder for disease to grow on the surface of vermiculite than it is on the potting soil. So what I'm going to do is just cover this over, these first 3 rows, with a tiny little layer of vermiculite, not much at all, just enough to barely cover the surface. And even for seeds that don't want to be buried very deep, because this is so lightweight and porous, it's okay to cover them. Just a little. This is also going to protect the top of the soil against fungus gnats coming to lay their eggs. And if you have these outside, it will also help prevent weed seeds from blowing in and competing with your actual seeds that you want to grow. Now always remember to label your seeds. I use plastic knives because I don't know about you, but every time we get a plastic set of silverware, it's always the knives that are left. And I can just break this in half and get 2 out of it, especially in these shallow of trays. When you have a tray like this, it's always best, and I went over this either the last video or the one before, to make sure you have a water reservoir on the bottom so you can fill up the water, put it in, let it soak up, then remove this top tray, dump out the water, and then you can put it back in. Now this is already pre-moistened, the potting soil and the vermiculite, so I don't need to water it now. What I do need to do is put on a plastic dome. What this is going to do is it's going to allow the moisture to stay inside. So you shouldn't have to water again until the seeds germinate. And that's when this comes off. This lid stays on until the seeds are up, at least 50% of them. Remove it because you don't want any disease in here. And at this point, you'll have to start paying attention to the water schedule and make sure that it's moist at all times. You can let the vermiculite dry out a little bit. That's always okay, as long as the soil underneath it stays moist. So now I'm going to take you in the house and we'll put it under the grow light, and I'll kind of explain a few things there that some of you had some questions about in our last video. All right, I've got the seeds I planted inside here, and I want to go over my setup. This is very basic. For most things in my climate, we don't need to start our seeds indoors. Most of this I'm doing for those of you who are in colder climates, or if you want to get something in the ground early and get a jump start on things. So I've seen elaborate setups from, YouTube gardeners in other parts of the country that have shelving units and a grow light on every level. And if you can afford that and you can set that up, awesome. I start out very simple inside. Some of these things that I want to keep track of, keep an eye on very closely. And then the heat lovers like peppers for sure, tomatoes, eggplants, cucamelons, if you're growing those take a long time. So that type of thing. So this is my setup for that. Just one of my Viparspectra grow lights. You all know the reason I love these. They do not have a fan. They're quiet. They don't have that bright bluish pink light. They're actually a full spectrum LED light. The main reason though is the dimmer. And with this dimmer, this is a question I got quite a bit on the last video is, how close do I put it? What do I start the dimmer on? The best thing to do is to keep it about 2 feet from the plants. Any closer, these are very strong. They will burn. They have a tendency to burn the plants. And I would start on about 50% brightness. So this is on now at like the lowest, and then the brightness gets really bright. So I would put it at about 50%. And then you can judge. If your seedlings are getting a little bit stretchy, leggy, turn it up a little bit. But this is usually good for me. Now below that, I have a heat mat that is going to be set to 75 degrees so that it gives a nice even temperature. It's not very warm. It just gives a little bit of an ambient temperature to the soil to jumpstart those seeds. And then I also have my oscillating fan that sounds very arthritic here. It's very old in the background, just to keep the air flowing, to keep the fungus gnats away from the area, to dry out the very top of the soil, to keep the fungus gnats and the pathogens down. Of course, I did put vermiculite on top, so hopefully that will help even further. So these are just going to go right here, and as I add more, they'll go under. A light this size will actually, for seedlings especially, it'll put light out enough for about twice its length and width. So you don't have to keep it right underneath. Now, if you're using the other types of lights that we talked about, the fluorescents, the CFL, those need to be right on top, like right on top of this plastic cover. Very close to be able to do that. So just make sure you have that done. And you need to have these on something so that if your fluorescent light is here, you can then take some things away as your plants grow to keep the leaves within 2 to 3 inches of the light, or you need a way to raise and lower this. A lot of you asked about this green light stand that I have. I have that on my website under products I love. It's on Amazon. I think it was $30 or $40. This is my second year of using it, and it works great for me. Also, you want to remember to make sure to have the light on a timer. I leave the heat mat and the fan on 24/7. The light would be on a timer 16 hours on, 8 hours off. I have mine run throughout the night because electricity, at least here, is cheaper at night. So I have it run the 16 hours spanning the nighttime, and then a lot of the daytime it's off. Any other questions you guys have, leave them down in the comments. Again, the next seed video will be outside, starting in our cold frame that we built last week. So I'll see you next time.